In May of 1990, two old men met at Dulles Airport outside Washington, D.C. One was a former Marine machinist from Indiana who never finished college. The other was a wounded Soviet tank commander from a Siberian peasant family. Between them, Eugene Stoner and Mikhail Kalashnikov had designed the two rifles that armed opposite sides of the Cold War. Roughly 108 million weapons in circulation, more than every other assault rifle in history combined. Over the next few days, they went shooting together, toured the Smithsonian, and talked shop through an interpreter they reportedly didn't need. Two men who understood each other's work the way only a rival can. The rifles they built could not be more different, and the reasons why start not with engineering, but with the wars that made each man. Kalashnikov was wounded at the Battle of Bryansk in October 1941. While recovering, he listened to Soviet soldiers complain about their weapons, a mishmash of bolt-action Mosins and submachine guns, neither adequate for modern combat. The Germans were fielding the Sturmgewehr 44, the world's first mass-produced assault rifle, firing an intermediate cartridge that split the difference between a pistol round and a full-power rifle round. Kalashnikov started sketching. His first designs lost in competition. His 1944 carbine was rejected in favor of the SKS, but the Soviet military wanted an assault rifle of their own, and in 1946 they launched a competition chambered in 7.62 by 39 millimeters. Kalashnikov entered, and his assistant Alexander Zaitsev convinced him to undertake a major redesign between trial rounds. The result, completed in November 1947, combined a long-stroke gas piston, a rotating bolt, and a single selector lever that doubled as a dust cover. None of the competing rifles met accuracy requirements in burst fire. The evaluators chose Kalashnikov's anyway because it prioritized what the Red Army needed most: reliability and ease of handling by conscripts with 6 weeks of training. By early 1949, it was officially adopted. Stoner's path ran in the opposite direction, not from the battlefield upward, but from the aircraft factory downward. He'd spent the war installing ordnance on planes in the Pacific, then worked his way up to design engineer. In 1954, he joined Armalite, a tiny division of Fairchild Engine and Airplane Corporation near Hollywood with 9 employees and one radical idea: apply aerospace materials to small arms. Every gunmaker in the world was building rifles from machined steel and walnut. Stoner thought that was unnecessary weight. His AR-10, completed in 1955, weighed 7.25 pounds in a full-power 7.62 NATO caliber. Competing rifles weighed 10 or 11. The Army tested it at Aberdeen in 1956, found it impressive, and rejected it anyway. It arrived too late, and the conventionally built T-44, which became the M14, had already won the political battle. But the M14's problems were about to hand Stoner a second chance. Here is where the engineering divergence becomes permanent. Kalashnikov used a long-stroke gas piston. Gas bleeds through a port in the barrel into a cylinder, driving a piston physically attached to the bolt carrier. The entire assembly travels together for the full stroke. A lot of mass moves every cycle. That generates a heavier recoil impulse, hurting accuracy in rapid fire. But it also gives the system enormous mechanical advantage. It will cycle through sand, mud, carbon fouling, and neglect that would freeze a more delicate mechanism. The trade-off was intentional. A conscript army needed a rifle that would function when maintenance was an afterthought. Stoner went the other way. His system, often called direct impingement, though he insisted it was an internal piston, routes gas through a thin tube directly into the bolt carrier key. The gas expands inside the carrier, pushing it rearward to unlock the bolt. No separate piston, no operating rod, no heavy reciprocating mass. Recoil drives straight back in line with the bore. The muzzle barely rises, and follow-up shots land closer to the first. The penalty: hot, carbon-laden gas dumps into the receiver. The system runs dirtier, demands tighter tolerances, and regular cleaning. Stoner assumed the user would maintain the weapon the way a crew chief maintained an engine. That assumption would prove catastrophic, but not because the engineering was wrong. The materials tell the same story. Kalashnikov built the AK-47's receiver from a milled steel billet, heavy, expensive, and slow to produce, but what Soviet factories could reliably do in the late 1940s. They tried a stamped sheet metal receiver first, the Type 1, but rejection rates were unacceptable. So they reverted to milling until 1959, when stamping technology had improved enough to produce the AKM, the modernized variant that most of the world actually knows as the AK-47. The AKM's stamped receiver dropped roughly a pound of weight and slashed per unit cost. It became the version licensed, copied, and manufactured in dozens of countries, sometimes in village workshops with hand tools. Stoner used forged aluminum alloy for the AR-15's receivers, borrowed directly from aircraft manufacturing, roughly a third the density of steel. Combined with polymer furniture replacing wood, the AR-15 weighed about 6.5 pounds unloaded in the new .223 Remington. A soldier carrying 300 rounds of 5.56 mm bore less weight than one carrying 100 rounds of 7.62 by 39 mm. In jungle warfare, where engagements happened inside 200 meters and patrols covered 15 miles a day, that arithmetic mattered more than ballistics. But aluminum required precision machining that many nations couldn't replicate. The AR-15's two-pin takedown, upper and lower receivers separating cleanly, was elegant and modular. It also assumed a manufacturing base with CNC capability and reliable supply chains. The adoption stories mirror the designs. The AK-47 was adopted by a centralized state that controlled every factory. The Soviet Union didn't need to win a contract. It needed to equip millions of soldiers and arm every Warsaw Pact ally. They shared blueprints. They licensed production to China, where the Type 56 alone may account for 15 to 20 million units. They sent technical packages to Egypt, North Korea, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and East Germany. No profit motive, no competitive bid, no patent enforcement. Kalashnikov never received royalties. He lived on a modest pension in a small Ijevsk apartment. By the time Izhmash finally patented the design in 1997, they accounted for barely 10% of global production. Estimates of total AK-type production range from 75 to over 100 million. In parts of Africa, a working AK has sold for as little as $6. The AR-15's path to adoption was a bureaucratic knife fight. Armalite, lacking production capacity, sold the rights to Colt in 1959. Colt demonstrated the rifle to Air Force Chief of Staff Curtis LeMay, who ordered 8,500. DARPA shipped 1,000 to South Vietnam for field testing, and the reports came back glowing. But the Army's ordnance establishment had just spent years pushing the M14 through adoption and wouldn't admit they'd backed the wrong horse. It took Secretary of Defense McNamara personally ordering adoption to break the logjam. In November 1963, the Army ordered 85,000 XM-16E1 rifles. By March 1964, production began, with Colt as the sole manufacturer. Then Vietnam happened, not as a vindication, but as a near catastrophe. The rifle had been tested and approved with DuPont 1MR extruded powder, a clean-burning stick propellant. But the Army switched to Olin Mathieson WC 846 ball powder, cheaper, more available, and what the Army had used for decades. The ball powder burned dirtier, altered the pressure curve, increased the cyclic rate by over 200 rounds per minute, and fouled the action far faster. Simultaneously, the Army declined to chrome plate the chamber and bore, a measure Stoner, Armalite, and Colt had all recommended. In the humid jungles of Southeast Asia, The combination was lethal to American soldiers. Failure to extract malfunctions became epidemic. Spent casings corroded in unchromed chambers. Troops pushed cleaning rods down the barrel to knock out jammed cartridges. Cleaning kits weren't initially issued because Colt's marketing had implied the rifle was self-cleaning. By mid-1966, units were losing confidence in their primary weapon during firefights. Some soldiers picked up enemy AKs. A congressional investigation followed. The fixes came through 1967 and 1968. A chrome-plated chamber and bore, a heavier buffer to slow the cyclic rate, phosphate coatings on steel parts, better magazines, and a comic book format cleaning manual because troops hadn't been trained on maintenance. The revised M16A1 worked. An Army survey found 85% of troops preferred it over any alternative. A 1970 presidential panel concluded the rifle had saved 20,000 American lives compared to projected casualties with the M14. But the reputation damage was permanent. A rifle designed for precision and lightweight had nearly been destroyed by procurement decisions made without consulting the engineer. The AK-47 had no such crisis, partly because its tolerances forgave bad ammunition, partly because the long-stroke piston kept fouling away from the bolt face, and partly because the Soviet system had no free press to investigate malfunctions. The rifle worked from Arctic cold to equatorial humidity in the hands of trained soldiers and child combatants alike. Its accuracy was mediocre. The heavy bolt carrier disturbed barrel harmonics, and the 7.62 by 39 mm dropped sharply past 300 meters. But most infantry combat happened inside that range, and volume of fire from a weapon that wouldn't jam beat precision from one that might. Today, approximately 8 million M16-type rifles have been produced for military use, with millions more AR-15 variants in civilian hands. The U.S. military buys M4 carbines for roughly $650 per unit. That two-pin takedown Stoner baked in during 1955 turned out to be the design's most durable feature. A single lower receiver accepts an almost infinite variety of uppers, calibers, and optics. The Kalashnikov appears on the flag of Mozambique. Kalashnikov Concern sells the AK-103 to governments for $150 to $160 per unit. Production continues at roughly 1 million AK-type rifles per year worldwide, most outside Russia, much of it unlicensed. The design requires no precision manufacturing base, no aluminum supply chain, no CNC machines. A stamped receiver, a chrome-lined barrel, a milled bolt, and wood furniture. And you have a weapon that will function for decades. Stoner's rifle optimizes for the individual shooter: accuracy, ergonomics, modularity, and the assumption that the user and the supply chain will do their part. Kalashnikov's rifle optimizes for the system: mass production, global distribution, extreme tolerance of abuse, and the assumption that the user and the supply chain might not exist at all. One is an engineer's answer, the other is a soldier's.